Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 11th Annual Literature and Conference. We are at a convergence. We are going to share some ideas and some interests. Before we introduce the student coordinators, the exceptional student coordinators for this conference, I would like to introduce someone who's a great supporter of this conference, a former English teacher, the head of the Archer School for Girls, Elizabeth English.
Thank you, Mr. Woganson. Welcome, everyone. House is packed, as it should be. This is the 11th Annual Literature and Conference, which is incredible. I want to start by thanking Mr. Woganson. I mean, he has been a devoted, big one, a devoted supporter of the conference and obviously organizer of the conference over the years, along with other Archer faculty in the English department. I also want to recognize the teachers from other schools who have been coming from this conference since it began. So if you've been coming to this conference and you're a teacher in the area for the past 11 years, please stand. I know we have at least one. No one's standing. I know you're here and you won't stand up, but we have a couple of teachers who have brought their students for the last 11 years, which I think is incredible. We're at a period in our country's history that I would describe as acutely anti-intellectual. I think this, it's true. Yeah. I'm doing it. I'm going to get political. You laugh because the truth is what's funny oftentimes. And I think that the reason this conference is so important and the reason your teacher's commitment to the pursuit of ideas for the sake of themselves, what it means to be intellectual, is just more important than ever, it feels to me. And I think the fact that we are here together talking about ideas, examining not only art and literature, but systems in our society, whether they're cultural, political, economic, social, the fact that we're sitting here and devoting a day to exchange ideas about all of it is incredibly important. And it is incredibly important that as students you carry this into your adulthood. You know, ideas matter. Reflecting on the nature and quality of the human experience is critically important for preserving humanity, our sense that others matter, that empathy matters, that we are more alike than we are different. That's what we're here doing today. So I thank you all for participating and for coming. It's now my pleasure to introduce the two student leaders of the program, coordinators of the program, Zoe Webb-Mack and Isabel Adler. Come on up.
Isabel, what side do you want to go over there because you're taller? Oh, yeah. Hello, everyone. Okay. Hi, everyone. We're going to start off with a joke. Hey, Isabel, what was Socrates' favorite thing to mold?
I don't know. What was it?
Play-Doh.
Oh my god, it's so good. Hey, Zoe, how does Voltaire like his apples?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Candied.
That Charlotte Bronte, though, she's a breath of fresh air.
I wish Medusa would stop objectifying people.
Hi, everyone. I'm Zoe.
Call me Isabel.
Okay, Isabel, that's enough. If you're sitting in this library, chances are you can appreciate the power of a finely crafted and highly intellectual sentence, like those we just read, for example.
We admit it. Those sentences may not have been the most well-written sentences out there, but never fear. A day of actual scholarly pursuits await. Presenters, we are so excited to hear all of your wonderful ideas and essays come to life. We are also thrilled to have so many guests here to engage in this day of intellectual intellectualisms. If you're not here to present, we hope that you'll ask questions of those who are.
And let us say that it's been a privilege to read and review all 200 submissions we received this year. The essays we received span genres, time periods, and theories. We read essays about the gendered power dynamics of Greek plays and the meaning of self in the era of celebrity.
Though not all the presentations you are about to see deal strictly with literature in the sense that we all may be familiar with, they grapple with what it means to be human. And though the texts explore a wide range of subject matters, perspectives, and time periods, their impacts and messages shape the way we view the world around us.
For Lit And is not a day of dry literary presentations about books by old white men. Rather, we are here to engage in critical thought and stimulating ideas about our world, especially given the recent attacks on free intellectual discourse and truth as a whole. Our participation in thoughtful, critical discussion is essential to the preservation of American values.
Before we start with the conference, we want to go over some logistics. Lunch will be provided for presenters here in the library, though you are welcome to eat elsewhere, like in our beautiful courtyard.
Additionally, we understand that not all of you can stay for the entire day, so if you need to leave, please do so quietly, and if you can, wait until there's like a break in presentations to exit, and you can exit out that way.
Yes. And one last thing. We need to thank several people who made this day possible.
Teachers, we greatly appreciate your commitment to both this conference and the academic pursuits of your students.
Moderators especially, we thank you for volunteering to lead the engaging discussions we have ahead of us.
As we always say, it is a truth universally acknowledged that a single school in possession of a literary conference must be in want of a fabulous facilities team. Luckily, we have, thank you, we have an incredible facilities team, and we would like to thank them for setting up our lovely conference today and making it possible for us to be here today.
We would also like to thank our faculty advisor, Mr. Woganson. His dedication has made this conference happen. Wog, you are the lofty literary reference to our reference.
Isabel, you were supposed to fill that in. But in all seriousness, Wog, we greatly appreciate all of the work you have done to ensure that we have this opportunity to engage in discourse with other passionate students from across the city.
Anyway, without further ado, this is going to be lit.
And
Let's get this show on the road.
okay, so I would like to welcome up our presenters for the first panel, Manipulations and Manifestations. And this panel has work exploring religion, fairy tales, and myth. So if everyone could take a seat at our presenters table. And then, is everyone here? Okay. And then I would like to introduce our first speaker, Alex Zabornak. So if you want to just come on up.
Is this to click for the PowerPoint? Okay, sounds good. So my name is Alex Zabornak. I come from Loyola High School, and I'm going to be presenting about Ted Hughes and a book of his poetry and how I think that relates to a couple other concepts that I'm interested in. So for my paper specifically, okay. Fantastic. Awesome. So my paper is called God Who Begot Nothing, the Christian Ancestry of Ted Hughes Crow. And so for my paper, I blended two major areas of my interests, philosophy and poetry, namely. Specifically, I analyzed the work of Ted Hughes Crow and saw how that related to the nihilistic works of Nietzsche and also theological works as well. So before we get into the actual analyses, I'd like to talk a little bit about what Ted Hughes Crow is, for those of you who haven't read his project or who aren't familiar with it. Crow's a very, very dark, forlorn, melancholy book of poetry. It's very depressing, nihilistic. People often read it happy and go out a little bit sadder. It centers around a crow. It centers quite literally around a crow and his journey through this existential nihilistic wasteland. And to get you into the idea of how dark it is, I'd like to read one of the poems. It's called Two Legends, and it's the second legend. Black is the wet otter's head lifted. Black is the rock plunging in foam. Black is the gull lying on the bed of blood. Black is the earth globe, 1 inch under, an egg of blackness, where sun and moon alternate their weathers, to hatch a crow, a black rainbow, bent in emptiness, over emptiness, but flying. So definitely very dark, sad stuff that we're dealing with. And I think as soon as I read that book of poetry, the first thing that came to mind was Nietzsche and his philosophical movement. Oop, pardon me. Okay. So Nietzsche is a German philosopher, and he's often tied to the movement of nihilism, which in short is the belief in nothing, that there's nothing that transcends our earthly limits, that nothing exists spiritually, that there is no afterlife, and most importantly, that there is no religion. Nietzsche's probably most famous for claiming that God is dead, and not that he died of natural cause, but very specifically that we all killed him, that in our secular culture, we killed God. That's probably his most quintessential claim. This relates to Crow because it has been described as the very croak of nihilism itself by authors such as Calvin Bediant. This sees how this philosophical movement lingers within Nietzsche's work as well. However, despite this apparent nihilism and secularism and darkness that exists within the poetry, there are some clear Christian imagery and Christian themes that seem to carry through, which is odd considering Christianity seems to be at such odds with nihilism and everything that teaches. In a world of darkness and nothingness, the idea that there's a heaven and an afterlife seems very at ends. That said, despite Crow, there are three main areas that we see Christianity carry through. That's in the act of cosmogony, 2, God figure, and 3, morality. So first off, cosmogony. For those of you who don't know what cosmogony is, it's not to be confused with the word cosmology. It's essentially the branch of science that deals with the origins of the universe. So it's the beginning times, the origin stories, anything that explains how we got where we are now. As we know in the book of Genesis, it's presented through the beginning stories with God's creation stories. There's that famous line, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." However, in Crow, it seems to pervert this traditional Christian message of what a cosmogony means. It takes that "in the beginning" and subverts it into a very different meaning. In his poem Lineage, it starts with, "In the beginning was Scream, who begot blood, who begot eye, who begot fear, who begot wing, who begot bone, who begot granite, who begot violet, who begot guitar, who begot sweat, who begot Adam, who begot Mary, who begot God, who begot nothing, who begot never, 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 who begot crow, screaming for blood, grubs, crusts, anything, trembling featherness, elbows deep in nest's filth." So again, it's taking that message, that's a very hopeful message of God creating man, creating Christianity, and it's completely inverting that message into a nihilistic context. While in Genesis, it ends with the creation of man as this agent of Christianity, Crow ends with the creation of Crow, an inherent agent of darkness and nihilism, subverting that original message. Which takes us to the next theme, the God figure. The God figure is pretty inherent in the Christian ideology, that there's something above us that we can look to and worship to. And that Christian God character exists within the Crow poems. However, the type of omnipotent aspirational God that has all the holy powers, that can do anything, that exists in monotheistic religions, Christianity specifically, seems to have been repurposed in Crow as an Übermensch character, or the Oberman. The Übermensch is another inherent character within Nietzsche and nihilism, and within that movement. What the Übermensch essentially says is it's a way to repurpose what God means, to take the need to have some holy entity and to then ascribe that into a more human context. Nietzsche is famous for quoting, "Could you create a god? So be silent about all gods, but you could surely create the Overman." It's our way of finding power in ourselves, that without a holy entity to look to, we could still find meaning in our lives. It's the human ability to aspire to greatness and power without any spiritual end goal or religious motivation. Nietzsche is famous for saying you can will yourself to power, that you don't need God, that you don't need religion, that you have all of it within you in order to find power and meaning in yourself. And this Übermensch character is essentially an inversion of what it means to be a god. It's taking that holy being and literally putting it into tangential physical limits that takes the metaphysical and puts it into something earthly. The Übermensch character exists very heavily in Crow. We see Crow willing himself to strive to power without any holy representation or reason to do so. In fact, in one specific poem called A Childish Prank, he perverts and inverts human sexuality while God just sleeps on. In fact, in this quote, it says, "God went on sleeping and Crow went on laughing." He finds this prank that he plays on mankind funny, whereas God just sleeps on. This shows Crow literally rising above God in his power and his might, all on his own, all without the motivation of any so-called holy powers. In this way, Crow surely embodies what it means to be an Ubermensch or an Overman character, thus taking the God figure and putting it into his own physical limits. And lastly, morality. Oftentimes, when you enter into such a dark and depressing context as nihilism, it can be worrisome that it'll lead to a context of amorality, that without a god or any type of motivation above you telling you what's right or wrong, that you'll lead to doing sinful or awful acts to other people. But despite Crow's nihilism and its very depressing context, it can be argued that Crow seems to maintain the sense of morality and the ethical code that is attributed to the Christian faith. For example, in another poem called Crow's First Lesson, after accidentally releasing a horde of maladies on the human population, including mosquitoes, sharks, disease, and on, he displays genuine remorse and flies away guiltily. This shows that even though he exists in this nihilistic, depressing, sad, forlorn context where there's no God and nothing above, he still finds the need to maintain his ethic system that started in the Christian tradition and carries over to this nihilistic context. So what does this show? Well, we can see that there are many characteristics of the Christianity and a religion context that somehow got carried over to a nihilistic context as well. Whether that's maintaining morality in a time where morality seems to not exist, whether that's the need to have a God, even and repurpose that as yourself, or whether that's finding a need to explain how we got where we are today through cosmogony stories. All these very Christian themes somehow make it into this nihilistic environment. So if we've learned anything from Crow, it's that if God really is dead, as Nietzsche said, then this newly formed nihilistic and secular culture must surely survive on his corpse. Thank you.
Thank you, Alec. I would now like to welcome up Gemma Brand-Wolf for our next presentation.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gemma Brand-Wolf. I'm a junior here at Archer. In my paper, Escaping the Garden of Eden, I examined Margaret Atwood's exploration of religion and rape culture in The Handmaid's Tale, specifically focusing on the biblical justifications of victim blaming. Is that how that works? Okay. So I first wanted to look at why Atwood would want to explore this. Why are we all so interested in the female experience? And I read an article called God, the Bible, and Rape by Reverend Will Gaffney, PhD. And in this, Gaffney says, rape is a human problem. And because many humans are religious, it is also a religious problem. This rang really true to me. So Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale addresses a similar issue, arguing that the Bible, specifically the story of Adam and Eve, is often a justification for rape culture, specifically the biblical justifications for victim blaming and the subjugation of women. So these biblical justifications of victim blaming are clearly seen in the story of Adam and Eve. As the story goes, God crafts Eve specifically out of Adam's rib to satiate his loneliness and his need. So Eve's narrative really begins with Adam. She first represents morality, purity, and the necessity of woman. However, Atwood explores the consequences of Eve's story, arguing that the subjugation, objectification, and punishment of women stem from Eve's desire for individuality and Adam's inability to accept Eve's agency. As the devil tempts Eve, she is faced with the possibility of her own individual agency. And when she falls for this temptation, she comes to represent mortality, sin, and eventually she comes to represent women's subjugation. So as Eve comes to represent weakness, with God's dual punishment of both Adam and Eve, Adam blames Eve, the victim of his subjugation, for wanting to find her own individuality. So this is first evident in what Atwood deems the testifying. Atwood highlights the pattern of victim blaming that surrounds rape culture, this overwhelming act of testifying, illustrating the inescapable incriminations that victims often face. As victims, women often feel fear in expressing their abuse because they fear that society will take their vulnerability as evidence for their conviction. During the testifying, the aunts, for the people in charge, force the handmaids to take responsibility for their own oppression, and they equate this to God's lesson that female subjugation is intended to teach women their place. So similar to Eve's narrative, Offred has no individual identity and no singularity from or separation from her commander. Just as Eve's identity is inseparable from Adam, as she is literally made from his rib, each handmaid is connected to her commander, until almost 1/3 of the way through the novel, Atwood does not reveal Offred, the main character's name, and when she does, it is as a denial. It is not her name at all. In fact, each handmaid's name is derived from her commander. Each handmaid is of her commander and does not have her own name. In this case, Offred is of her commander, Fred. So, through this idea of forbidden knowledge, Atwood strengthens her allusion to the story of Eve, suggesting that the handmaid's desire for the outlawed, treasure of the unknown, in this case of their identity. So, as we all know, the more forbidden something is, the more we want it. Patterns of blame form the cycle that acts as the biblical foundation of rape culture. As men subjugate women, often on the authority of the Bible, women strive for autonomy, and consequently, men oppress women further to prevent them from achieving this individuality. Atwood's symbolic representation of femininity alludes to the fruitful Garden of Eden, as well as to the biblical command to be fruitful and multiply from Genesis. The commander's wife, Serena Joy, has a garden in which conjures something subversive in Offred's mind. However, this subversive power is not that of female agency. It is of male desire, objectification, sexualization, and ultimately of reproduction. As the sex organs of plants, flowers represent the ability to give birth. And as Atwood equates women to flowers in Serena Joy's garden, she is suggesting that women are the sex organs of society. While Offred does rebel, as she sees this garden in the form of an affair with her commander, she remains bound to the narrative of Eve, avoiding her dangerous desire to clamor and settling for the silent temptation of sex and reproduction alone. Offred's experience of Serena Joy's garden is one of the first instances of this rebellion. Offred personifies these flowers, stating that whatever is silenced will clamor to be heard, though silently. These seeds of rebellion, while they are limited in their initial stages, cause Offred to consider her individuality and confront the real possibility of her own power beyond silence. As she sees these flowers, she acknowledges the possibility of female power, even though in the garden it is of sexuality and reproduction. So eventually, Offred claims autonomy through her own religious agency, undermining the biblical structure of Gilead and contradicting the tradition of victim blaming. These seeds of rebellion that I talked about in the previous slide instill in Offred this possibility of individuality, eventually leading her to claim her own religious agency. As Offred reclaims this agency, she prays alone. She addresses God as my God. Offred adds that maybe she couldn't bear to know. The fall was a fall from innocence to knowledge. Offred successfully escapes these patterns of victim blaming and punishment as she rejects the temptation of knowledge and simultaneously claims her own religious autonomy. Offred eventually contradicts Eve's inability to avoid the forbidden. And in this religious agency, Offred accesses individual power without remaining bound to her male counterpart. Therefore, she detaches herself from the duty of childbearing that falls upon Eve in Genesis. So while The Handmaid's Tale primarily follows this archetypal structure of Genesis, Atwood eventually diverges from this narrative, arguing that the possibility of female autonomy must begin with the rejection of the biblical justification for victim blaming. Atwood's argument resonates frighteningly with modern-day rape culture, which is one of the reasons I chose to explore this topic. As Gaffney explains, the authority of the Bible allows the justification of biblical gender norms, however patriarchal, misogynistic, or rapacious. Similarly, Sohaila Abdullahi, a victim of rape herself, broadens the religious issue of rape culture, arguing that, regardless of the justifications of rape, we need to put the responsibility where it lies, on men who violate women and on all of us who stand idly by while we point accusing fingers at their victims. So Atwood confronts the religious justifications for rape, just like Reverend Gaffney, and as Abdullahi proposes, debunks the tradition of victim blaming and places blame on the oppressor. The Handmaid's Tale is a powerful and relevant commentary on rape culture. It highlights modern society's failure to challenge and eradicate victim blaming, calling attention to how the teachings of the Bible leave women more vulnerable not only to rape, but to the frightening culture that surrounds it. And so I ask you, as I finish up my presentation, to go into the world, and I know this is a big thing to ask, but to Point your accusing fingers not at the victims, but at the oppressors and at the bystanders who let rape happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Gemma. Now I'd like to welcome up Jake Celeste. Then I think you're good.
Sorry. Thanks. It's a little close. Okay. Sorry, I just have to get my things in order. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jake Celeste. I go to Loyola High School. I'm a senior, and the next slide. The paper that I submitted for this conference is titled "And the Gates of This Chapel Were Shut, and Thou Shalt Not Writ over the Door: The Early 19th Century English Church's Turn to Industrialization in the Songs of Experience" by William Blake. So firstly, I just want to clarify that Blake often referred to humanity as man, and I realize that this correlation is completely outdated, and I'm going to apologize for my use of the word man in referring to humanity beforehand. Sorry. Yeah, okay. Sorry. That's great. Okay. So history defines William Blake as a poet, a printmaker, and a painter, but really he's the romantic zeitgeist personified. He alienated himself from society to develop into a visionary, transcendental revolutionary who advances the idea of a revolutionary Christianity that embraced elements that the orthodoxy rejected, such as spiritual enlightenment through nature. And Blake romanticizes this spiritual enlightenment through nature as the universal brotherhood of Eden. Blake understands this as one's connection with other members of the human race when in touch with one's surroundings or environment by offering oneself to others. This is directly in touch with Rousseau's Natural State of Man, in which the state of nature is the hypothetical, prehistoric place and time where human beings live uncorrupted by society. As for the humans that hypothetically existed in this mindset, throughout his poems, Blake commonly refers to the child archetype as an emblem for the natural condition of man, juxtaposed with corrupting social constructs. In other words, in romantic poetry, children are never really children, but rather Rousseau's perfected form of humanity. In my paper, I focused on a few of the Songs of Experience poems in which Blake emphasizes that humanity's encounter with and discovery of spiritual revelation can only be accomplished in conjunction with nature and natural states, as opposed to the religious dogma communicated through an inherently flawed power structure or the English church of the early 19th century. So the first poem I'd like to read is The Holiday Holy Thursday. Sorry. A little bit disarrayed here. Okay, so, excuse me, sorry. So, in order to provide some context for the analysis, I'd like to read 3 of the poems in Blake's Songs of Experience. There's about 12. And the first one I'm going to read is The Chimney Sweeper. So, here we go. A little black thing among the snow, crying weep, weep in notes of woe. Where are they, father and mother, say? They are both gone up to the church to pray. Because I was happy upon the heath and smiled among the winter snow, they clothed me in clothes of death and taught me to sing notes of woe. And because I am happy and dance and sing, they think they have done me no injury and are gone to praise God and his priest and king, who make up a heaven of our misery. So, The Chimney Sweeper is Blake's most pointed criticism of industrialization. In the poem, he deems the church corrupt for reveling in the monetary benefits that accumulated from the donations of its poor and deprived members who were forced to cough up endowments just to find spiritual enlightenment. This relationship between the church and its constituents paralleled that of industrialization and the poverty-stricken families of London during his time, who had no choice but to sell their children into slave labor for unregulated factories. Blake draws a connection between these victims of industrialization and the English church's use of the same social class to drive its own economic profit, suggesting a corrupting industrialization of the church. Thus, as Western culture in its totality took a pivotal turn towards industry and mechanical efficiency, Blake reverted to primitivism as a revolutionary gesture. He saw a spiritual harmony found through encounter with God, which Blake understood as a form of natural existence, opposed to experiencing revelation in the profiteering industrialized church. So I'd also like to read to you guys Holy Thursday. Is this a holy thing to see, in a rich and fruitful land, babes reduced to misery, fed with a cold and usurous hand? Is that trembling cry a song? Can it be a song of joy? And so many children poor. It is a land of poverty. And their sun never does shine, and their fields are bleak and bare, and their ways are filled with thorns. It is eternal winter there. For wherever the sun does shine, and wherever the rain does fall, babe can never hunger there, nor poverty the mind appall. So the holiday Holy Thursday in early 18th century England pampered then paraded orphan children around the streets of London to uphold their image of Christian spiritual grace. But the underlying purpose of this holiday was to evoke pity and charity from the churchgoers so they would donate to the church and provide it funding. But despite all these criticisms of the church, Blake really offers a solution. So in his conclusion of Holy Thursday, he illustrates through this stanza that true divine presence and goodness in society is possible through a natural metaphorical state of spring, which he juxtaposes with the previous stanza's metaphorical winter. The spiritual state of spring suggests Rousseau's archetypal childhood and Blake's Brotherhood of Eden, while the spiritual state of winter speaks to the emptiness of man's spiritual life under the corrupt and materialistic Church of England. Blake suggests that poverty is unnatural, challenging the societal trend that moved away from nature to worship technology and the cynical religious practices of an increasingly industrialized church. Both the industrial factory culture and the culture of the urban Anglican church accepted and even benefited from the large population of impoverished and orphaned children. Blake saw that the ideal way to reverse this spiritual deterioration was to reject the industrialized church and seek God in nature, moving away from the social, moral, and spiritual ills of contemporary society in an exploration of humanity's natural condition. And according to the scholar Michael Ferber, a state in which Blake believed that our souls mingle and join through all the fibers of brotherhood. So, however, Blake realized that because growing industrialization and urbanization in the late 18th century made a large-scale reversion to primitivism impossible, he looked to philosophical principles from the French Revolution for inspiration. Scholar John Gold Fletcher claims, even as regards the dates of his writing, it is clear that, if the French Revolution had not happened, Blake would have been, in all probability, a minor poet and watercolorist, with a turn to eccentricity. During the French Revolution, the French Third Estate's attempt to overthrow the clergy and nobility of France encouraged a rapid radicalization of politics, tailored to preserving man's inalienable rights and placing the political power in the hands of the nation, moving political and social power away from the church and monarchy. As the revolution liberated the French population from this absolute monarchy and oppression, Blake marveled in the inspiration provided by the movement, which looked to uproot century-old politics that confine the human soul. To Blake, the French Revolution was an embodiment of a reversion to humanity in its most natural state. And though the revolution did not definitively demand a return to Rousseau's state of natural existence, it was a reaction against what the church had become, an institution of oppressive control and profit in an increasingly industrial culture. Ultimately, I concluded that whether Blake simply envisioned an intellectual and spiritual separation from the corrupted Church of England, or romanticized a complete rejection of contemporary society to synthesize man with nature, does not take away from the fact that he detested the Church's commercialization in order to maintain its dominance in the rapidly industrializing English economy, which resulted in Blake's revolutionary poetics, a scathing indictment of man's intellectual and spiritual deterioration under an authority that ripped him away from his elemental self. I'd like to conclude my presentation by reading this poem, The Human Abstract. It is one of Blake's last poems in the Songs of Experience, and it is his final affirmation of the spiritual potential within man, a lesson learned from the political and cultural revolutions of his age. Where are you? Pity would be no more if we did not make somebody poor, and mercy no more could be if all were as happy as we. And mutual fear brings peace, till the selfish love increase. Then cruelty knits a snare, and spread his baits with care. He sits down with holy fears, and waters the grounds with tears. Then humility takes its root underneath his foot, soon spreads the dismal shade of mystery over his head, and the caterpillar and fly feed on the mystery. And it bears the fruit of deceit, ruddy and sweet to eat, and the raven his nest has made in its thickest shade. The gods of the earth and sea sought through nature to find this tree, but their search was all in vain. There grows one in the human brain. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome Charlie Foster up here. Thank you.
That was his. Hi there. I'm Charlie Foster, and this is Yeah, there we go. This is I Don't Hate You, But I've Tried, a Rig Veda love story. I could tell you a million facts, but but the most truthful would be those that are fabricated. Subjectivity captures true character. This is the lens I see mythology through. Mythology's truth is that its information rests in the people who create it and believe in it. Personally, I'm terrified of myths. On the surface, I draw horror from the sheer predictability of their believers. Myths such as the Bible or Quran create values in their disciples, values with the ability to stabilize nations and unite faraway people. Yet, a shared value set is like a shared genome. It produces clones. I do not mean to imply that people who believe in these things are in any way inferior because of their beliefs, rather that they are similar in outlook. My generation has a rampant need to differentiate itself from itself, and while I share this need, I realize its irony. Individualism is a tricky concept because if everyone embraces it, they stop being individuals. Their values are effectively homogenized by their desires not to be. The myth of the self proves to be just as prevalent as the myths of religion. But I gotta say, this is a superficial distaste based on thoughts that I don't quite believe are my own. Rather, ramblings of a general misanthropy? I said that right. Peel back a layer and find the real reason. My mother is my true fear of myth. All her life, she worked in the public eye in a career that was not actually chosen for her. And all her life, the world tried to make her myth. Jody isn't even her real name. Again and again, the cult of fame wrote and photographed and called and ruined, desperate to create my mom for what she never really was. I didn't understand, feeling the pressure but not really knowing why or where it came. My mom spent 50 years desperately trying not to become myth, hiding and running and hiding and running. We are people, and the world hates us for it. I can't tell you how many times I've cried as cars without license plates creep towards me. I can't tell you why people comb through screens trying to find the dad I never had, and I don't know why I wish he was there to find. I don't know why people kill in my name, but the guilt overwhelms me. All I know is that one day myth will win, because one day she won't be there to defend herself, and she will be gone, replaced by Monroe smiles and gilded pavement. If myth wins, then she isn't human, and she doesn't love me, and she isn't my mom, and she isn't here. I couldn't want her to be. So screw myth and screw those who believe in it. You are self-made killers, and I am afraid of you. My history compels me to despise myth, but reading the Rig Veda collapsed this blanket nature of my hate. I felt a general connection to this creation myth, and while my mind seethes in thinking about the category it belongs to, the text is extremely comforting. With further self-reflection, I found that the Rig Veda's lack of condescension, a common aspect of Western myths, its hidden meanings based rather on interpretation of the vague than the usual reorganization of the explicit, and its distinctly profound beauty of prose to overcome my bias, forcing me to love this object of personal diametric opposition. The Rig Veda creation story shies away from using its mythology as a method of reminding humanity of their inferiority to the divine, but rather it acts as a device to show the path to enlightened information. Its goal seems to be less in the attempts to subjugate its reader to its own dogma, instead presenting knowledge in the form of questions rather than answers. This allows the myth to follow the path of a journey rather than a retelling. For example, the myth begins, when neither nor being nor not being was, nor atmosphere, nor firmament, nor what is beyond. What did it encompass? Where? In whose protection? What was water? The deep, unfathomable. This conjures to my mind abstract ideals rather than, strict ideas. The passage brings me on a mental journey as I think of what nothingness is without nothingness. It triggers my curiosity and makes me remember why I love to be an intellectual, to find variable truths. To me, this passage says that before the beginning, there was no matter and there was no lack of matter, forcing me to draw the conclusion that the only thing that existed before existence was lack of concept. Could this idea be further expounded to imply that thought created the universe? The answer is only one of an infinite amount of equally profound ideas formed from only the first 4 lines of this Rig Veda. Its ethereal beauty lies in its ability to reflect the reader back on itself, starting the conversation of the unknowable. The vague and enigmatic language used in the Rig Veda also enforces its tendencies to honor individualism and expand my mind's eye into a scan of life itself, rather than chaining it to a narrative focal point. The biggest mystery of this passage is who the true creator is. This search for meaning is a common thread throughout all cultures, and so it is entirely relatable. However, a unique and exciting quality of the Rig Veda is both its failure to describe its creator and its allusion to what the creator is not. For example, the text asks, "Who knows truly? Who can here declare it? Whence it was born, whence in this emanation?" Describing that nothing is known about the first creator and nothing can be known about him. Yet, in this, later in this passage, the phrase, "by the emanation of this the gods only later came to be," appears, definitively proving that the creator is not a god at all. These breadcrumbs of information leading to the unknowable are littered throughout the passage, further engaging me in the text as I attempt to unravel this mystery like a crossword puzzle. I'm a fan. Lastly, I love the Rig Veda because it is a beautiful work of art and one that simply matters. Religious texts live and breathe, fighting for conceptual territory, just as humans do with land. Survival of the fittest is strictly enforced, with generations disposing of interpretations that no longer apply. Doctrines even breed. They combine and split and differentiate. The Vedic tradition becomes Hinduism, which becomes Buddhism, which becomes a variable known only to the future. The point I'm trying to make here is that these texts have souls. They are personified by the world as it is a world that they created. I see them in the same beauty as I see human life. They have stories, they have thoughts, and they have defined goals. The only true difference between the lives of men and women and texts, is the texts cold and powerful in humanity. With their control of the actions of their believers, the Rig Veda and its fellow dogmas live borrowed lives. With every follower, these texts grow stronger. Myths are more powerful than the gods they depict, and in that way, they are gods of a certain type. Yet, my love for the Rig Veda does not reside in its divinity rather than its benevolence. This creation myth has no violence or evil or even rule. It is purely abstract guessing. Thus, the Rig Veda retains an element of humanity by admitting that it has no answers, but it will still search for truth. I love the Rig Veda because this journey is also mine. Its beauty and inner life are parallel to my own. I know myself all too well. Years of introspection, possibly motivated by narcissism or a abundance of free time, gave me a sight of myself that I would consider nearly objective. The truth is that ruminating over the Rig Veda shattered this concept of objectivity. I now realize I was looking at myself from the perspective of myself. The Rig Veda, I now find, is a layered and articulate alternative perspective. I will never trust it. I'm not willing to give it my ghost, but I love it all the same. The truth is that I'm no longer confident in my own sovereignty. I will not believe, but I do, in a sense. I believe questions are more important than answers, and that the world was without concept, and that creation is not conscious. If I'm no longer myself, please don't tell me. Great. Oh, I'm actually not quite done. Got a little bit more, analyzing analysis and such. So I have a bit of a confession to make. This isn't a paper about religion. This is a paper about mourning more than anything else. It's a coming to terms. At the time of writing this paper, my mom had been out of the country working for a few months, and I felt like she was slipping away from me. Not emotionally or really physically, but who she was to me was slipping. Everyone has a view of famous people. You all know that they're generally seen as people, person to person. Well, here's the thing. I know my mom as you know her, but I also know her as my mom, and these are two conflicting stories held at the same time. And yeah, I know my mom for who she is, but when every day you're told she's a different person, you start to believe it. I say in this paper that I'm afraid of those who believe in myth, but what I really mean by that is I'm afraid of myself when I do. In the end, the real question is, who owns her legacy, you or me, because it isn't me. This paper is about mourning because through the Rig Veda, it is an examination into the positives of not remembering my mom for who she was. I am prepared for the death of who she is to me, as if finding a myth I love will give me the ability to love her when she becomes one. It's a thinking on the bright side. My thesis for liking the Rig Veda was essentially a lack of condescension, beauty of prose, nuance of meaning, and taking a life of its own. When I lose the memory of my mom, I will still have her beautiful art, background, the nuance in her decisions, a lack of condescension, kind of joking, and the new life her legacy takes on culturally. And yes, I like the Rig Veda and I believe everything I wrote, but a lot of the items in my essay apply to both. Behind me is the Maryland Diptych by, oh my God, I'm spacing. Andy Warhol, that's what's written up there. Yeah, funny, I've written essays on that. It's a copied picture of Marilyn Monroe, impersonal, two-dimensional, and perfectly iconic. I knew her when she wasn't pink and yellow, a picture of a picture. I knew her when she frowned and wore pajamas and celebrated Ramadan, even though she didn't really know what it was about. But I won't for long, as I see exactly what you see. A static picture of someone who never really existed, but does because we believe our eyes. This last picture is it's from one of my favorite movies, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. In this movie, Jim Carrey tries to stop his memory from being erased while it is being erased. Help me try. Thank you.
Thank you. Maddie Hockman, get up here. Oh, yes, okay.
Well, I have to follow that. Thanks for that. All right. Just go like that. I figured it out. Don't worry about it. Hi, my name is Maddie Hockman, and I go to Archer, and I'm a senior, last I checked. So the title of this essay that I've submitted for this conference is Grim Interpretations, Nazi Modifications of Classic Fairy Tales. And before I get into this, and in order for you all to thoroughly understand what I'm trying to say, the art of competent propaganda must be unpacked. And in a broad sense, that is the use of information, generally of a biased or misleading nature, for the advocacy of political causes or views. And effective propagation is that which is understated, sometimes complex, and most often straightforward. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. However, this brings forth the issue of the exclusivity of propaganda. Its audience is adults, those working with a fully developed mindset. Children struggle to comprehend realistic explanations because, as child psychoanalyst Bruno Bettelheim put it, they lack the abstract understanding required to make sense of them. When propaganda is aimed at children, the intended doctrine is pushed into books and stories, things that children can relate to and understand. And this is where the famous works of Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm come into the picture. And before I get into them, we need a little bit more background. Bruno Bettelheim. He was a child psychoanalyst, and he wrote a very famous book that we read in our English class this year called The Uses of Enchantment. And what his main idea was with this was that fairy tales work to externalize inner conflict. They do this through different characters, through different storylines. And these stories often have the largest impact on children because they're written through the mindset of one. Think of it this way. If you are a 5-year-old child, what makes more sense to you? An adult explaining to you, the earth is held up by gravity, this unseen force that just keeps it up and moving so it doesn't fall. Or there is a giant that holds the earth on its back all the time. It's always there. If you are a child, what makes more sense to you? To me, it would have been the giant. Maybe you were smarter than I. Fairy tales hold the same simplified yet beautified view of the world as a child does, and the answers that fairy tales provide are fantastic rather than true, because children do not understand truth. And that's just something that I didn't really understand, or maybe I did when I was younger, and something we all most likely understood when we were younger, and as we grow, it's something we forget. And now I bring you to Germany. Smooth transition there, I know. In the mid-1800s, all you need to know is that there was a failed harvest, and if you can't guess what that means in a time where harvest and things had a pretty big impact on how much money you made each year, there was national recession, high unemployment rates, and at the same time there was a large influx of immigrants. Coincidentally, at this time, many of those immigrants were Jewish immigrants. And many Jews were not in the farming industry. They were in banking, stereotypical, I know, but they were. And they were not related to farm work, so they did not struggle as much with this recession. It did not relate to them. Which brings us to the Brothers Grimm. Their father was a journalist. He died of pneumonia when they were both very young. This plummeted their family into poverty. They were surrounded by others in poverty, and surrounding that group were those not in poverty, namely the Jewish community. And one interesting thing about the Grimms that will come very in handy very quickly is that the two were keen German nationalists. They were, yay Germany, let's go. Kind of like the Go USA of today, but for them. Yeah, it was like that. It was like that. And it was like that. And they were very anti-Semitic. This theme had just emerged in that time. A man named Wilhelm Marr had written a story in which he claimed to have created the term anti-Semitism. Whether this is true or not has not been fully unpacked by historians yet. I am perhaps foolishly trusting his word on this one. And so what you will see is that their anti-Semitism and German nationalism was infused into many of their stories. Nope. Kinder und Ausmarken. Kinder und Ausmarken. That is childhood and household fairy tales, or tales. This was their most famous collection of works. And at this point you may be thinking, I don't remember them talking about, how the Jews were bad somewhere in Cinderella. The mice weren't talking about it. That's not the point I'm trying to get here. These were the stories that are not as well known today. For example, this one, Der Uden im Dorn. Der Uden im Dorn, which is loosely translated to The Jew in the Brambles. You don't need to know too much about this story. Basically that a Jew, has a fiddle and it's stolen from him. When someone else plays the fiddle, the Jew starts to dance. This is not explained, he just does, and trust me. And so the Jew pays the man who stole his fiddle money so that he would stop playing the fiddle. And then the Jew claims, this man stole my money and my fiddle. This man is going to be hung. However, he asks the community, may I please play the fiddle one last time? They, for their own reasons I'm sure, agree. He plays the fiddle, the Jew dances, and from this, the community decides that the Jew is the thief, and the Jew is hung instead. The reason why they came to this conclusion is lost on me, and perhaps I'm missing something clear. However, I'm still struggling with this. But this was one of the more, I will use the term subtle, versions of what this meant. Personal favorite, the magic table, the golden donkey, and the kugel in the sack, which I very much apologize, I did not try to translate into German because my father is my German translator and I could not understand what he was trying to say when he translated it to me. So I assumed you guys would not mind. What this story is basically about, written in 1812, you don't need to know the entire story, but the basis is that a man has 3 sons, and when they disappoint him, he forces them to wear ein Geibenfleck, which is a yellow spot on their arm. Wears around a band he gives them, and they wear it on their arm. I don't know if you've ever seen one of those bands. If you haven't, that's a different discussion, but you can Google it later. And obviously, this may look very familiar to you if you have ever opened a history textbook pertaining to the 20th century. And obviously, this was something that was used in the 30s and 40s to identify Jews from other people in communities that were controlled by Nazis. Which leads me to my thesis, which was that during and in the years preceding World War II, the Nazi regime resorted to the Grimm's fairy tales as a sort of PG propaganda. This goes back to what I said before about how children don't understand truth. Propaganda, straightforwardness, is lost on them. They need something they can relate to. And as I said earlier, children relate to fairy tales. This is the propaganda that we all are aware of. The fat, ugly Jew eating the poor, innocent Aryan youth, or the young Aryan man who is claiming support for his new regime. This is what we know. This is what adults could see. To a child, perhaps one that cannot read, or even if they can, this means nothing. A stop sign to a child who cannot read or doesn't understand means nothing until their parent yanks them back towards them so they don't go into the street into oncoming traffic. Which is where I get into these kinds of stories. Rotkäppchen
is more commonly known as Little Red Riding Hood. And I'm sure you all know the story. So in this scene, that story, like I said earlier, the Nazis manipulated these fairy tales. This was a film in 1937. It is Little Red Riding Hood. It is the same premise. And I don't know how long it's been since many of you saw any sort of interpretation of Little Red Riding Hood. But generally, after Red Riding Hood is eaten, spoiler alert, I'm so sorry, a man, generally a kind local huntsman, comes in and thinks, oh, there's a fat wolf. There's probably people in this wolf. I should let them out. It is the same in this. However, you may not be able to tell from this picture, that is not a local huntsman, that is a SS officer. On his other arm is SS officer, and it is obviously very unclear in this picture, but this is one of the few images that can be found to the public. I do believe that both of these are hidden away in that they're not really available for public access very easily. The other one is Der Gestefelte Kater, which is Puss in Boots. Puss in Boots, very interestingly, this version you cannot find images of. And I did some research on this, and apparently viewing of this particular film is illegal in Germany. And so this is a picture of one of the Nuremberg rallies. It is similar, however, because in this point, obviously, it is very clear what they're doing. They're all hiling to Hitler. In this film, this 1935 version, Puss in Boots defeats, in a startlingly simple way, an evil wizard. In the original story, it is a lazy ogre. It is a wizard in this one. And from that wizard, they all come together at this society, and they put him on a pedestal, and they say, like, Heil Puss in Boots, he is our hero, we live again. Heil Hitler, he is our hero, Germany will live again. That's very positive, I know, but that is this basic idea. And so if you could just imagine this image, and then if you can imagine from Shrek the animated Puss in Boots and kind of put it right there, that is basically the idea we are getting at. Here. Yes. It's basically, all I really meant through this is that these were just examples of films that were put out there because children understand these kinds of film. They understand this. These two different entities were sadly very similar in that the work of the Grimms was so anti-Semitic, so nationalistic that it was a prime opportunity for the Third Reich to use because adults have their own opinions. Children can be so easily manipulated. And I suppose that's the point I'm making in this. Overt manipulation of fairy tales and other things aimed towards children is so common. It happens in Disney films today. When girls were little, what we think is, oh, my prince is gonna come to find me. Disney stories don't tell us, oh, I'm gonna go off to school, I'm gonna go learn, and I'm gonna go be a teacher or whatever it is you want to be. No, they teach you that you sit around, you buy a beautiful dress, and you wait. And that is what influences children today. What influenced children in the 30s and 40s was this. And I'm not asking you now to watch every Disney film or read every story that you may to young children or even in some sort of class and say, stop everybody. I think that's a swastika in the corner. Did you see that? I don't know if you saw that, but I think I saw it. All I'm asking is that you be aware of how malleable these tales are and how malleable the mind of a child is and how, in the wrong hands, such a detrimental message can be sent out. But this does not mean we should disavow fairy tales because they can lead to good things. We just must be hyper aware and not assume that everything is ball gowns and fairies because, as demonstrated by our history, it clearly is not. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have time for a short Q&A. Okay. Yeah, what? I'm just trying to take it out. Does anyone from the... Oh, yes. Yes. Does anyone from the audience have any questions? I'd like to open it up to you guys first since we don't have that much time. Any questions for the presenters? No. Yes.
Hi, my question is for Maddie. I loved your presentation. I didn't know any of that, so that was super fascinating to me. And I'm just wondering what got you interested in that topic?
Is it not working?
This one is.
Okay.
Okay. Oh God, fine. All right. So, anyone who has been in English class with me or has been my English teacher for 2 years knows that I try to relate. Most of my essays end up being related to this general topic. I have related almost every single essay to this area of history, which is a bit worrying, I understand, to the point where at the beginning of this year I was told, we're doing these things this year. Maybe you could branch out to a different area, maybe even a different area of history. But yes, so I think because I was so curious in history, this was, in a way, I guess, my last hurrah, because after spending so much time on this essay, I never want to study this period of history again. So this was just kind of me wrapping up all those interests I've had in every essay I've somehow related to this into one big last thing. Eloquently put, I know.
So sort of going off of that, a couple of you talked about mythology or religion in different cultural and historical contexts, and I was wondering if you could, answer the question, how do you think myth has evolved? We see mythology and fairy tales and religion often in more traditional contexts, and I think we think of them as sort of a thing of the past or something that started in the past, but what do you think their role is in contemporary society?
I think that myth, especially in religion, coming from a religious school, is super up for interpretation. I don't think that anything in the Bible today, whether you're religious or not, can really be interpreted literally at all. You need to find a deep meaning. I mean, me and Herb both talked about the Garden of Eden and that kind of natural state, but we talked about it in completely different ways. So I think it's really just up for interpretation.
And I think one of the biggest things. Oh, I'll stand. I think one of the biggest things. I'm shorter, so I got to do that. I think one of the bigger things is that you can see a lot of carryover from different generations. So whether that's taking some inherently Christian themes like I did and showing how they ring through in this new context, we see that these thought processes that different peoples from different generations have, they definitely bleed over. It's not one doesn't end and a completely new one rises from the ashes. It's they take what they've learned and they reconvert it in a new setting. So I think it definitely does carry over from time to time.
I think something that is really important in talking about these myths is the idea of responsibility, which is something that I really looked at in my paper. And the idea that, yes, these myths can provide a moral compass and a structure for our lives sometimes, but I think that when we use them to take responsibility for our actions, that is when, I guess, flaws occur. I think that, especially in mine, the idea of using the Garden of Eden and these justifications are conflicting in our modern society. And like you said, there's so many interpretations and they can't really be taken literally in our modern day society.
The question was how myths relate to now, right?
Yeah, like how has myth evolved?
Well, I'll give you. I mean, my essay was about how celebrity essentially creates myths. But if you want another example of modern myth and kind of how it's gone from the Bible and all the regular stuff that not regular stuff, more traditional examples of myth to now, I would really consider the newest use of myth to really be social media, because after all, you're putting out there exactly what you want to be seen, and you're making yourself into a figure that it's absolutely you, and I'm not going to say it doesn't exist, but it's not all of you. And so it's myth.
Thank you all for presenting. I think. Oh yes. Coming up there.
So each of you were talking about myths, older myths, biblical, further back, since then. I'm curious what you think are new myths, not how they're made, as you just said, but what actually are the myths that that have appeared more recently in our culture?
Yep, this one. I guess I'll stand. This is actually going off of what you said, because I think many of the new myths are related to social media, but they're not myths necessarily like myths about fairies or magic. They're more myths about image and things like, oh, if you don't eat, you'll look like this. If you do this, you'll look like that, which I know is not very close to the myths that we've been speaking about here that are more historical. But I feel like if we're going in context with today, those are modern day myths, because with the times they're changing, we can't say that myths are all fantastical. They're more realistic, but that doesn't make them any more or any less mythical than they were before.
I think what's interesting about myths today is that they're more about the future. They're more about what can happen and what you should do. I think there's the idea of, I think you were talking about individualism, of like you were going to go out and make your claim in the world. And I think that while that did exist in the past, it was more about like this is the moral foundations and do with it what you will. And now it's more this is what your future should look like. Go out, claim.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think one of the biggest myths that exists today is the very notion of truth. We see with alternative facts and using a billion different studies to justify, it just calls into question what we hold to be true. And it seems in this day and age, there is no real definition of truth. And that's why I think that our generation specifically needs to be the generation that holds truth to the bare essentials, that we focus on what actually does exist, that we're not afraid to call people out when this myth exists, and that we we put forth what is real to the population, to the world, so that propaganda doesn't exist, and so that the new myths today can be ones that benefit our generation and not ones that harm them in the end.
I got one little thing.
Yes.
Quickly? All right. As for the more traditional myths, if you've all heard of like the whole Slender Man thing that happened. Yeah, that is absolutely a modern myth and terrifying. That's all. No, but essentially the whole background of it is I feel like rooted in kind of like a fear of the older myths, because I don't know if you read about it, it has a whole like, I'm going to call it a made up history, but just the internet lives and blah, 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 blah.
Okay, well, thank you everyone from this panel. Thank you for sharing. We're going to have a quick 5-minute break, and then we're going to reconvene for panel number 2. Thank you.